good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, you thirsty bunch of beer drinkers, whenever and wherever you're tuning in from. The landscape of beer media has changed dramatically over the last 5 years here in Ontario. We used to have a lot of beer writers, a lot of people with personalities, big personalities talking about beer, media folk who paid attention to what was happening in the industry. We had newspapers covering beer, magazines devoted to beer, TV news anchors discussing beer, websites dedicated to reviews and industry news, blogs, vlogs, and special events. The list goes on and on. There were people covering new beer releases, brewery openings and closings, and everything in between. And I was one of those people. I had a blog, the Great Canadian Beer Blog, and it ran from 2007 to 2012. And during that time, I was joined by a lot of other people covering beer. But over the years, many of these writers have moved on. Their outlets gave less and less space for beer, event coverage dwindled, and the blogs dried up. Greg Clow, a name we've mentioned a bunch of times on the show, continued his coverage on Canadian beer news up to the end of 2023, shutting down the site after 12 years or so of telling readers what was taking place in Canadian beer. Today, there are only a few that are still around. Stephen Beaumont and his Beaumont Drink site, Cass Enright's Bar Towel still exists, on a very sporadic basis. Ben Johnson does his thing from time to time at Ben's Beer Blog and that other podcast he appears on with the awesome host, Chris Pellerin. And then there's Jordan St. John. Jordan isn't a one-trick pony, though. He's more of a Percheron. Writing about beer, covering the industry, speaking on news outlets, teaching about beer, leading historic tours, and much more. He's joining me today on Between Two Fermenters to talk about it all. And we're recording this on a Friday, the day right before the long weekend, and I made him travel all the way from Midtown to Etobicoke, to glorious Etobicoke, and I bet he's thirsty. And we have a cure for that. So we're going to crack some Great Lakes Lager, my official beer of summer, and get at it. Hang tight.
Toronto's Festival of Beer returns to Bandshell Park at Exhibition Place between July 26th and 28th. Come to TFOB and enjoy the best of beer and beverage, showcasing over 400 varieties of products, the best of bites, eats, treats, and more. And the best beats on the Bandshell stage, including headliners Cypress Hill, Josh Ross, Taking Back Sunday, all rocking the Bandshell stage. Don't judge, just enjoy. TFOB, July 26th to 28th. Tickets available at beerfestival.ca.
So I hope you've gone over to beerfest.ca and purchased some tickets to Toronto's Festival of Beer. It was a great episode with Les Murray, the president and owner of TFOB, and we gave away some tickets on the show 2 weeks ago. So thanks for tuning in, and okay, let's get on with today's show. Mr. Jordan St. John, welcome to Between Two Fermenters, your second appearance on a show called Between Two Fermenters.
That's right. The previous one was video.
And we had a crack host with Alex Whitlow. You were joined by Robin LeBlanc, and that was a fun episode.
It was good. We basically turned the Galifianakis tables on them.
Yes, you did. And that's available on the Great Lakes Brewery YouTube channel. You can still go back and watch that. A young Jordan, a young Alex, and a young Robin all talking about beer in a fun I'm going to say fun, but I don't know if you guys had fun at that.
Well, I wish they'd left some of the more offensive stuff in.
Yeah. Jordan, we have a bunch of beer on the table. You came all the way from Midtown to Etobicoke. So what are you going to crack here?
Well, it's a long journey. I'm glad to see that Royal York Station is finally finished being redeveloped. The bus bays are in good condition.
Well, we have the Gardner down to whatever lanes. We have Lakeshore construction. We have Adelaide, Eastern, Queensway. Everything's it's a gong show. 401. So I'm glad the TTC actually came through today, because I know on Monday they shut it down for 12 hours or something.
That's exactly right.
But get a beer in you. What are you having?
Well, what you need is refreshment in a situation like this. So I'm going with the Dos Claves Limon.
Dos Llevos Lime.
Well, except for the fact that I'm very Welsh, so if I see two L's, it's going to be Clavis.
Okay, Jordan, we have a lot to talk about today. You and I have a long history with each other, and I was trying to think of where did we actually first meet. Do you recall? Because I can't recall. I can remember an event at Volo. I think it was Cast Days. I'm pretty sure it was Cast Days. And there was this guy wearing a bright orange shirt with bleach blonde hair. And I'm pretty sure that was you. So that would have been 2007 or 2008.
Yeah, there was a period in university where I had bleached hair, and I thought, I'm bringing it back.
And you brought it back.
Well, people weren't ready for the whole Dexter Holland thing, so.
I'm pretty sure I have a picture of you pouring some cask on the patio at Volo, the original Volo location. And you have bleach blonde hair. And I think you and another gentleman by the name Rob Symes, one of the co-founders of Toronto Beer Week back in the day, I think you guys teamed up to cover the patio.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun. Like back in the day when you had the original location of Volo, you had the ability to volunteer for cask days on a real small basis. Like when it got to the Brickworks,
it was too much, yeah.
Well, not only too much, but the number of people who were volunteering for it was so large that they had an after party just for the volunteers. With the Dundonald Street location, like back in the day, just before craft beer kicked off, oh, that was something.
We just drove by it recently. We went out for dinner on a Friday night and drove down Yonge Street or up Yonge Street, and it just brought back this flood of memories of the cask days. The Great Lakes. Great Lakes was the first brewery to do a complete tap takeover at Volo. It was around 2009, 2010, and right when Volo was really making a name for itself. And it brought back so many memories of that. And I know you and I would drink beers there, and a lot of the old guard of craft beer, that was their the mecca of drinking local fresh beer or going and trying some Belgian stuff.
It was so great because you'd see breweries from across Ontario before 2010, and I don't think people understand this. We had like 30 breweries in the province.
35 when I came back from Nova Scotia. It was 35 in 2008.
And some of those are like St. Andre Vienna lager.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
But I mean, periodically you'd have Stonehammer Pilsner show up in Toronto, and it was an event worth remarking on.
I'll tell you a fun story about Stonehammer Pilsner. So that was a brewery based out of Guelph. It was Charles McLean after Wellington went over and did this, and George Eagleson was a brewer. And back in the day, Say What on Friend Street, they were selling Mill Street Organic, and they found out that the bar next door to them was getting a deal on Mill Street Organic, and Say What, that's a no-no. You can't do that. So they kicked off Organic. So what they did is they called up Stonehammer and said, hey, we want your light lager. Well, it overwhelmed the brewery. They couldn't supply the beer. And so I don't know whatever happened by that, but it was just, they were selling so much organic, and Stonehammer came in and they just couldn't sustain the volume that Say What was going through of that beer.
Yeah, it probably traumatized George Eagleson for the next decade.
I think he's all right now. But okay, so beer author, educator, blogger, beer historian, podcaster, all terms used to identify you. I know who you are, and a lot of the listeners will, but just give us an elevator bio, because the one that you have online on your website, St. John's Wort, is like a novel. So just condense it, if you will.
It's super hard to condense the thing. Like, for some people, like there's an obvious role that they fulfill. But basically, I just, sit in the middle of the beer industry and talk to a bunch of people about beer. I mean, it's that simple, but I've got credentials. I'm a Cicerone. I'm a certified BJCP. At some point in the near future, I'm going to be teaching the WSET beer program, which is hopefully, going to start up in autumn.
Give you some money in your pockets too.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. I mean, it would be nice to have the income to support the lifestyle. But in addition to that, I've written 5 books, probably 1 million words in columns.
That was just one article, that 1 million words.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So you
probably about tax excise.
That's right. That's true. And we're going to get into that. But where'd you come from before beer?
I worked at a publishing company down the street from Bar Volo.
Okay.
So when I moved back to Toronto from university, I was looking for something in the publishing industry. I worked in call centers before that, just to get a foot in the door in Toronto, pay the rent. And it turned out the publishing company I worked for was too small to really be in any way aspirational. And I was the lowest paid member of staff in a unionized publishing shop.
Okay.
Which means that, then
you spend all your paycheck on beer?
Well, pretty much, because the job got worse and worse. People would leave the company, and I would just assume more responsibility. If there is actually a theme to my life, it's just assuming more and more responsibility.
Take on more and more until you can't do it again, and then you take on rate. Something else. Yeah. Okay, so but how'd you get into beer, though?
Well, I was down the street from Bar Volo.
And so that's it? That changed your life?
Well, if I have to blame it on anything, it is actually the TTC.
Okay.
Because we're right outside Wellesley Station, and you think to yourself, if I leave my desk now, I can get on the subway. And, at the time they hadn't got automated transit control. So the subway northbound at Wellesley is completely rammed solid every single night from 5 to 6 p.m. So you need an hour, of leeway.
That's a good excuse to go to Volo, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And over time, you probably spent more and more time at Bar Volo.
Yeah.
To the extent that I think I was still paying down drinks I had there in 2009 by 2015.
Jeez. Yeah, those Monday nights, $4 pints. It'd be nice to have that back again. But so you got into beer because you're going to Volo because you didn't want to wait in line to get on the northbound Wellesley or Yonge Street line. But why did you decide to get into like writing about beer or being a talking head, if you will, on beer related issues and matters?
Well, because I am a really good evaluator of economic situations. It was 2008, and I thought to myself, hey, I don't have to work for a living. I could be in the brewing industry just after a global economic collapse. So Niagara College was starting up a brewing program, and I basically applied for that the first year. I think there were 1,000 applicants for 24 spots.
So you weren't in the first year intake though, right?
No, I didn't make it the first year.
Okay.
I didn't have grade 11 biology.
Okay.
So I had to take that from TVO.
There you go.
So there I am, 29 years old, sitting in my apartment, learning about deer populations and Galapagos finches because this is somehow relevant. And lo and behold, like 3 years later, I read a piece about Galapagos finches and how beer evolution works.
Another million words.
Yep, absolutely right. Probably quoting Darwin at great length. So, that kind of thing happens. By the second year, I thought, okay, I've got the class, but there's still going to be like 500 applicants. I need some kind of distinction that's going to set me apart. So I started writing a blog called St. John's Wort. Never choose the name of your blog the first week. That's a terrible idea. That is a beer pun that has stuck with me for 15 years that nobody gets.
You can change the URL.
Yeah, I probably
JordanSt.John.com.
That would work. I mean, Beaumont did it.
So you got into the college, you started this blog, and
I got into the college like probably February that year for the next September. So I started there September 2011. By the time I got there, Angus Keeley, who was writing for Sun Media at the time, he liked what I was doing, and he didn't really want to write a beer column.
Yeah.
So he said to the powers that be at Sun Media, hey, you should hire this guy.
Someone. He actually went on to be like in corporate communications, but Angus was a beer writer with Sun Media for many years. I'm going to say 4 or 5 years he did that shtick. And okay, so you get into Niagara College, you get this job, you got the blog, and then how does it morph into everything that you do now? Like I said, you said 5 books, you had a podcast, you're teaching at George Brown, which we're going to get into because there's some parallels there. And you're doing a lot of like beer history stuff. So how did it all just morph?
Well, I think the thing is, if you have a lot of spare time and you're writing a weekly column and you're going to a college you're commuting to on the bus, like you've got a lot of time for research and reading and all that stuff. And eventually, it became pretty clear that the other people who were in the beer program at at Niagara College, were a little bit apprehensive about the fact that you have a national syndicated beer critic in the program. Yeah. Because, what's he going to say about you?
Exactly.
So there was a little bit of tension there. And John Downing, God bless him, the head of Niagara College, said to me,
of Niagara College beer program.
Yeah. You like writing things. I've been offered a book about home brewing.
So you guys collaborate on this?
Yeah, he said, I don't want to write a book on home brewing. How would you like to do it? And you can have most of the money.
Well, there you go. And then you came out with Lost Breweries of Toronto, or no, you did what was the other book before Lost Breweries of Toronto?
Well, I did a book called Ontario Beer.
With Grumpy Al McLeod?
Yeah, Uncle Al.
Uncle Al.
Everybody's pal. He's great. I mean, the thing you have to understand about Alan is that he has other jobs that he doesn't like to talk about.
He's a lawyer.
Yeah, he's a lawyer for
the city
of Kingston.
Yeah, there we go. Well, we just outed Al.
Well, he's been very instrumental in a number of projects they've had recently, and for whatever reason, he likes to keep those two worlds separate. Yeah. And fair enough.
He's going to be mad that I didn't mention him off the top of the show as one of the still existing beer writers.
Well, he mostly amalgamates things, but
I wouldn't even, is he a beer writer or is he a complainer?
It's an interesting distinction.
We can move on from Uncle Al. Yeah, no, he's a great guy, and we go way back. But.
Well, no, I think, what he likes to do is watch other people complain and then tell them why they're wrong about their
and then
complaints.
gets involved.
It's like,
so
he's a shit disturber.
You did a book with him. What was it called? The breweries, Great Lakes Breweries, or something like that, wasn't it?
Ontario Beer: A Heady History of something or other.
Oh, okay.
A lot of the book titles, we didn't choose them.
Yeah.
My first one was How to Make Your Own Brewskis, the go-to guide for craft brewer enthusiasts.
You do look like a guy who would say brewskis all the time.
Yeah,
when I
absolutely.
go for but
Let me get some suds in me.
Jordan, Josh Rubin and I, who used to write for the Toronto Star, or he still does write for the Toronto Star, but he used to cover beer for the Toronto Star. He and I always got into it because he said there's nothing wrong with calling it suds, and that's my one big pet peeve in beer. If I see a legitimate news source refer to beer as suds, I get angry, and then I'll send the editor a message. If someone's doing a live, like our friend Nick Dixon at CP24, he'll never call it suds because he knows now. But if I see a media report like Colin DeMello, suds are going to cost you much more because of your tax, I'll tell Colin you can't do that again. And so it's one of my big pet peeves. So.
I think there was a brief fashion for wobbly pops.
I don't have a problem with wobbly pops, but the suds is different. But back to the books. Lost Brews of Toronto, you and I share a big affinity for our beer history. Tell us about that book. How did it come about? The research involved in it before we get into the guidebooks that you and Robin did. Well,
you're writing a book about the history of Ontario, and the difficulty is that a lot of Ontario doesn't have historical records.
Mm-hmm.
So
Toronto does.
Yeah, Toronto, because it's a municipality, they've got the Toronto archives in addition to the provincial archives,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to university archives.
Mm-hmm.
You've got all this material, and by the time we got to the end of Ontario beer, I realized I had a completely separate book. Like, we couldn't use everything that I had for Ontario beer, and as a result of that, I had to use it somewhere. And one of the things that happens if you start writing anything historical is people keep walking up to you and saying, hey, didn't there used to be a brewery just over there?
Mm-hmm.
And, I got tired of answering that question.
So you just hand everyone a book now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Here you go. That'll be 1999.
So that came out in what year, that book?
2014. It was nominated for a Heritage Toronto Award, 2015, I think.
And how many breweries are still standing in Toronto from the 1800s? Is this the one, Dominion, or the one at Todd Morden?
Well, there are bits and pieces of some of them, mm-hmm. like the Davies Dominion Brewery, mm-hmm. Which is now...
It's nothing now. It's a damn shame. Vistec's on the back end of it, but yeah, I know what you're saying. There was a restaurant there, but Vistec, the camera company's there. Yeah. But you can still see the archway is where the horses would come in and out. And before Dominion sold to Fab Concepts, that restaurant, they had history stuff, archives all over the place, slides, glass. It was just amazing. But that should really be preserved. And I got a question coming up.
Because that was the Dominion on Queen, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, Dominion, Sean Jaranovich.
Where they had a ukulele night every Tuesday.
That's right. And they actually had Brewiana nights where people would come, meet, show off some of the new stuff they'd find. And for those out there, Brewiana is the collection of old brewery memorabilia, documenting the history. There's not too many of us out there that do this. A lot of folks are unfortunately passing away due to old age. Larry Shirk was one of the latest, who had one of the largest collections of Brewiana in Canada. I have some stuff, but it's not even about collecting the stuff. It's collecting the oral history. And this podcast has a little bit to do with that, is interviewing people that have had impacts in craft beer and getting this information, on audio.
Well, the difficulty with it is that in a lot of other jurisdictions after Prohibition, you had breweries that would, they would have shuttered, but all of the stuff, all the chattel from the brewery continued to exist. And in Ontario, because you have Canadian Breweries Limited, is it EP Taylor?
EP Taylor.
He goes around and he basically takes over all those breweries. He's interested in the volume. He's not interested in the brands. And as a result of that, you lose all of the historical record for just about everything between 1890 and about 1931.
Yep.
So if you wanted to make an authentic product, not to praise the big guys, but at one point there was a J.H. Molson 1908 recreation. that was exactly,
and it was a good beer.
it was letter perfect in terms of the recreation value. Like it was the right alcohol percentage, right ingredients, right bitterness. It gave people a window into that.
Well, and Molson and Labatt have done a tremendous job of in Moosehead detailing their history. And is it Matthew Blackert? No, it's not. He's the professor out at Ottawa University, University of Ottawa, who's written extensively about the history of Labatt. But because they've kept all their records and allow people access to those archives.
Well, it was an interesting exercise because there were some archives. Like Alan and I got to go to the Canadian National Archive where the Molson fonds are stored. And we got to take a look at what was in there. Because the people on the desk were not particularly attentive, we photographed all of it, which you're probably not meant to do. We didn't use flash photography, which is, I think, what they're worried about. So, there are all these beer labels I have from 1904 onward.
You have digitized now.
Yeah, they're all somewhere on a hard drive. And the great thing is, like, Larry's collection did a lot of that work for me as well.
Yeah, you can still find his collection at the Thomas Fisher University of Toronto Library.
Yeah, at Robards.
At Robards, yeah.
If you're a big fan of brutalist architecture, that's a great place to go.
So we've geeked out on some history. Let's move on. But you know what? We'll do another podcast in the future just about Toronto beer history. But so you and Robin LeBlanc, she was your co-author, created the Ontario Craft Beer Guide. And you did 2 editions or 3 editions now?
2 editions. 2015, 2016, and they came out the year after. So it's like there's a little delay.
And so I think everyone who's ever heard you talk or interviewed and knows the story behind the book. So you guys traveled by planes, trains, and boats and whatever to get the story. But you took that, you stopped publishing, stopped updating, and you went to a podcast. That ran until January of 2023. You did 1 episode in 2023. What happened?
Well, Robin got a real job.
Okay.
I mean, this is a thing that happens periodically in the beer industry is, people periodically realize they could be making more money doing literally anything else.
Selling beer instead of
selling beer, or, I mean, you could work for the government. That would probably pay more and you'd get benefits. But this is one of those things where it's just kind of an inevitability.
Yeah.
People get old, they have kids. And some people are lucky enough, like yourself, to transition to a marketing role at a brewery where you've got, a little stability. And like, if you're going to be a beer writer, for God's sake, you don't really expect that. It's not something you can claim from life.
Well, I was a beer writer. I worked for an independent publishing company too, Taps Media. They own the Canadian Brewing Awards. And I said, you know what? I'm going to work for one brewery and easeify my life, if that's even a word. And I did. But you guys got up to 172 episodes. Do you miss doing what you're doing right now?
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, the reason you miss that is because you're sitting there with somebody. Robin and I don't really view ourselves as like writers when it comes to that kind of thing. What we view ourselves as is a comedy duo. So like the news that we were updating people on was pretty much widely available. I mean, we would be able to give some context because we had a significant amount of information about how things work and
the contacts in the industry and people that would give you information.
But also, we would just spitball comedy bits, and some of them worked and some of them didn't, but we had fun.
So maybe that's why it's not going anymore.
Well,
maybe I should have just stuck to the beer news.
That would have been better, probably.
We're going to move over to the industry. We're going to talk about the industry. I've talked about it on the show in the past, so it's no surprise to listeners to hear that our industry is struggling. You know this just as well as we do, that those of us that toil away in the brewery. But what's your take on the situation right now, current status of the beer industry here in Ontario?
Well, I mean, let me think about that for a second. The current status of the beer industry in Ontario, if it were on like a EKG machine, it'd be beeping away solidly, but you might be worried about the bronchial intubation.
So you have thought about this, is what you're saying.
A little tiny bit.
Yeah.
It's interesting, man. Like one of the things that I do in the background, and I've been doing it since Canadian Beer News, like Greg stopped doing the news part.
Yeah.
But before that, there was a pretty good website called Ontario Beverage Network.
Ontario Beer Net or
something
like that. Yeah.
And they had a map of all the breweries in the province and all the cideries in the province. And that is a functionally incredibly useful thing to exist. And unfortunately, the guy who was in charge of that
Let's just move on from that. Yep.
needed to go away. So taking over that facility from it, like basically what's happened is anytime I'm updating the map, people will send me new information about what's opening, what's closing, scuttlebutt from around the industry, all that stuff. And, you know, at the beginning of the year, I'm sitting there and I'm feeling a little bit like the Grim Reaper, just because there's a lot of bad news coming in and there's not really like newspaper articles about things closing.
Yeah.
If a brewery peters out, it's just going to shut down.
They're going to put an Instagram post out and then that's it. They walk away.
Maybe an Instagram post. I mean, there were a couple of locations in Toronto for Big Rig that closed and
no one really
no
said,
fanfare at all.
Right, yeah.
Like I never even heard about them, which is a bad sign. So, you know, we lose like 40 breweries over the last couple of years, physical locations, brew pubs, clock tower, you know, that kind of thing where there's many locations of something. And you're kind of looking at it as though that's a bellwether for other things that are about to happen. I mean, the cost of ingredients has gone up, all the input costs.
Well, everything's gone up, but our cost or what we charge customers. So say we do a price increase, it's not at the rate of inflation that we pay. So breweries eat a ton of the extra cost that goes into making a product and putting a beer in a can.
Well, you know, I think I can talk about it fairly freely. I get updates from the LCBO quarterly about like what products are going to the store. And sometimes that's useful for the Growler News and Notes thing because brewery one-offs are great, but nobody's going to drive to Willibald every single time there's a new beer.
That's right.
Sometimes you just want stuff that's available globally for people. And you start seeing price creep a little bit. So I think Blood Brothers, for example, has a $6.50 Paradise Lost spiced sour cherry.
Yep.
And I'm just looking at that going, so I could buy that, or I could buy a can of Jaeger for $2.75.
You mean Great Lakes Lager for $2.90?
That's right. Yeah, that's also a very good deal.
But I see where you're coming from, and it's one of the biggest struggles. We just did a price increase, and we don't like doing price increases, and we did a good significant one. We're still the best valued, in my opinion, but I think there's more that goes into it, and like you've written a lot recently about taxation, about the CPI. You've been a touch critical of the OCB over the years, but with me just saying what you've currently been writing about, you've been very helpful with the OCB. You and Scott Simmons, the president, share a lot of emails, and you talk about what's happening in the industry. And so, what changed? And is it you just want to help with that, or is it just you decide that no one's talking about it, and so someone has to do it? And
well, desperate times make for strange bedfellows. Is I guess the way to put that. When Scott took over, like I knew all the things that John Hay had been doing previously with the OCB, and I may have referred to Scott on Twitter as "Hey New Guy," which probably set me up as a bit of an adversarial entity. The thing is, like, who else is there? You know, one of the problems that you have with the OCB in the previous era, and I want to say this is before the pandemic, is that for the most part, the interests that they represented were the largest craft breweries in the province, which would have been Bose, Steam Whistle, Muskoka, Brick at the time, because they would have been a member at one point.
Yep.
And you're talking about people who are at a different excise bracket than the majority of the breweries in the province. And by the time you get to the point where you have 350 physical breweries in the province and the OCB is representing 80 of them, not only is the thing somewhat illegitimate on that basis, because it doesn't represent the breweries of the province of Ontario, like 3/4 of them.
Yeah. They had a different structure in how to join the OCB then, and it was much more pay-based. They've updated that. But that's always one of the things that when I hear someone say, oh, they represented the bigger breweries, it's couldn't be further from the truth today. The majority of the board members are smaller breweries under 15,000 hex. So they have the controlling votes of any board meeting, if you will.
Well, absolutely correct. And this has something to do with the fact that Bose no longer functionally exists. They're owned by Steam Whistle.
Even if they did, they'd still have one seat.
Right.
And they would still not have the majority of the bigger breweries after 15,000 do not. So it goes based on anything over 40,000, I think, is you get a board seat.
But the thing that Scott did that I liked was to eventually, probably starting around 2021, he went out and started a charm offensive to get some of the smaller breweries on board. Mm-hmm. And I think this is incredibly important because, if you're going to represent the province of Ontario and you're going to be fighting for, improvements to the excise tax for breweries, you need
the provincial tax.
Exactly. Yeah. But you need people who are, popular amongst craft beer drinkers.
Yes.
To be part of that discussion, because otherwise it's just completely tuned out.
From a public perspective, yes.
That's exactly it. It's a messaging thing. Because
for years and years, the brewers that have been involved have really made the change that have benefited the smallest of small breweries. And in the last, like you said, the last year, OCB have signed up Bellwoods, Town, Dominion, Fairweather, Grain and Grit, Blood Brothers, Mascot. The list goes on because we're more, united as a front. But what changed with you though? That's what I want to get back to. Like you were critical. So Scott came in, made some changes. So what is it now that you're working with the OCB and doing some stuff with them?
Well, I mean, very simply, the thing that changed is that, March 15th, 2020, I lost like 5 jobs one day. Mm-hmm. George Brown, they stopped classes because clearly
you couldn't do it.
Yeah. Tour guiding, toast.
Yep.
Can't do that. There's no tourists. Can't cross the border. Mm-hmm. Magazines, I think the Growler went to twice annual.
They did. Yeah. It was a quarterly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was under the Luxmores. That decision was made. And what I realized is like, okay, this is terrible. Mm-hmm. The situation is I'm going to be sitting at home. Legitimately, I'm entitled to CERB.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be making $2,000 a month. All the breweries in the province are going to be suffering. How do I help these people? Because that should probably be your role in a crisis, is to do what you can with the resources that you've got.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting at home making no money, buying discount groceries from the Western Empire.
Okay.
Daily. You go out and...
This isn't a political podcast, by the way. It's a beer podcast.
Fair enough. I mean, you might have beer on shelves there. I don't want to screw up your deal.
We're all good.
But, I've got an entire list of all the breweries that exist in the province. I've got all their contact information, their social media, their emails, all of this stuff. And my feeling, basically 3 or 4 days in is, okay, anybody who wants that information, who can do something useful with it, like if we can get... like, I don't want to say Berlin airlift, but like we need people to be delivering beer for, there's going to be people starting up businesses trying to sell stuff for home delivery. Mm-hmm. It would be really super useful if you had the ability to contact all those breweries without having to do the research on it. Yeah. So I gave away basically just all the information I had so that we could continue to have delivery.
And you and I collaborated on that document at one point with the OCB because there was a lot of contacts that had changed over the time. But so it's a really good point that you make. And this is something we've always espoused in the industry is we're very collaborative. Mm-hmm. And so this was a very genuine thing you did, and you helped out by giving the thing, the list and the database. And we've turned around and we've helped to build that up, and together we've done some stuff to help with home delivery, your CPI stuff, and the stuff that you send to the Minister of Finance. That stuff gets looked at. It does, and it comes back, and so that's a really cool thing that you did. Staying within the industry, but shifting just a little slightly. Why aren't more people covering beer? So you talked about people moving on and getting a real job and doing things like that.
Oh, yeah.
But all the big newspapers, they still have wine coverage. There were blogs and vlogs. We got Drunk Pokeroo still doing his thing. Magazines. We used to have a number of magazines that focused on beer in Canada, but in Ontario. Local community coverage. Everything's gone now. So why aren't more people covering beer in the media?
It's an interesting question.
Why are we starting our own podcast?
Well, for the simple reason that there is no other podcast. Yeah. There's all this vacuum.
Did you hear that, London, Ontario?
Yeah, take that, Johnson.
You mean Chris Pellerin? He's the host of that show.
Is he?
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't actually listened to it. I don't.
Oh,
No, seriously.
fighting fire with fire.
Never heard one. I feel bad about that. I should probably check it out.
We do like them.
Are they like
we're on their enemy list right now. So
are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But, Chris Pellerin, keep up the good work. So why aren't more people doing beer media?
Okay. Well, here's the difficulty. And it's a difficulty that craft beer faces all the time, is that there's always a new generation of people.
Mm-hmm.
And when we came up, we were very lucky because it's 2007. Everything was extremely concentrated in Toronto. Like if you think about the number of good beer places there were.
In the events that happened, we were all in the same circle.
Right.
Yeah.
So everybody is learning everything at the same pace.
Mm-hmm.
And you're at maybe Say What or Barvolo or the Only Cafe or the Victory.
Or Mill Street.
Mill Street, sure. And you have this tendency to absorb information. So everybody knows all the same stuff. Like one of the things that's great about beer compared to wine, for example, is that it's so informationally based, that it's so ingredient based, that it's so process based, that in order to know about it, the way that we did at that time, people are sharing information, they're sharing technique, recipes. Like it's not just us sitting there.
Yeah.
At Barvolo, it's also the brewers for the province.
Yep.
Like Mike Lackey is sitting there. He might learn something from Ian McCustra. They might learn something from, I don't know, Mike Duggan if he shows up.
Michael Hancock.
I was
looking at a picture today because I was trying to find that picture of you with your bleach blonde hair. Brian Moran.
Yeah.
Matt Tweedy. Michael Hancock.
Yes.
Mike Lackey. George Eagleson. This was a Thursday night. It wasn't an event. Everyone was just in town doing deliveries or whatever. And I snapped a picture at the bar, and it was 2008. So like Matt Tweedy's gone on to Tooth and Nail, but back then he was with the Beer Bistro.
Yep.
Eagleson's done his thing. Lackey's done his thing. Brian Moran, rest in peace. We talked about it on the last episode. But again, you haven't answered the question. Why aren't more people writing about beer?
Well,
or talking about beer?
Here's the thing. Like our barrier to entry because of that was so low. Like if you showed up, everybody had a beer blog. Mike Warner had a beer blog. It was called A Year of Beer.
Yep.
He had a beer every single day. Chris Grimley had a beer blog. None of you have ever heard of Chris Grimley, but believe me, he's very tall.
Tight pants too.
He would also, he put on his about page for his WordPress blog, I'm only in this for the free beer. And people still sent him free beer. Like at this point, because media has been so devalued, like the idea that you're going to have a beer column that isn't going to be advertised to in the Toronto Star or in the Globe and Mail, it's basically an expense that they would be paying that they wouldn't be able to recoup through advertising because nobody's going to cover Molson or Labatt.
True.
Because there's like 360 other breweries in the province.
I would almost say like the breweries have just taken it on themselves. Internal marketing, internal communications. Wayne Newton is the beer writer for London Free Press, and that's all the subsidiaries that they own. I think he's the only one that they actually give ink to now. But can you name another newspaper reporter or newspaper columnist?
Well,
anyone that,
periodically Josh Rubin will get off his duff and do something.
Oh, but the beer store, that's business. But I'm talking about like beer news other than the beer store.
No, not really.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, one of the other problems that you have is that the thing has become so incredibly dense informationally.
Well, let's move on because let's talk about you and the growler. Okay.
All right.
Okay. So there is, I was trying to get you to lead into that. There is one publication still doing some beer news, and that's the Growler, which you're now running. So it's the Ontario's Craft Beer Guide magazine. It's a mouthful. But I want to say full disclosure, GLB has advertised in the magazine since its inception in Ontario, and we currently sponsor the weekly news and notes segment. So I just want to put that out there before we talk about it.
I filed that column today, boss.
Yes. So we were driving over here, and I said to Jordan, "Oh, you got a new post out." Okay, I haven't looked at it yet, but tell us about that. Tell us about your role with the Growler and news and notes.
Well, I'm the editor for the Growler, which is an interesting place to be because, as you say, there aren't really other beer writers.
Yeah.
So what I have to do periodically is like try and recruit a bunch of people. And at the moment, I'm very lucky to have some people who are actually interested in writing about beer.
Should try to get like Max Moran, but David Ort Get him back.
Get David back.
Get him back.
I don't know, man. He seems pretty happy to be working in educational software.
So, okay, you're trying to recruit some people to write about beer.
So I got Max. Sometimes Ben will pitch something, but he's got a podcast.
Hot dogs. And
Robin will like I want to do a food pairing column.
Yeah. With hot dogs.
Yeah.
Okay.
He may have already done that, actually. Robin will sometimes chip in. She's not, as into the whole beer thing at the moment. But I've got Mel from Ottawa. She's doing some great stuff. She's covering events down there. She did a nice piece for us on the Orleans Beer Festival.
Okay, yeah, I read that.
Yeah, Mark Hayek did a piece about breweries in Collingwood. One of the criticisms we heard legitimately from the people in the province, rural breweries,
was that there's no coverage outside Toronto.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is difficult. But like if you're talking about Windsor, you're talking about Western Ontario, Blue Water Township, like Goderich, that kind of thing. Difficult to get people out there, but not impossible if you give them enough time and enough opportunity to do it, because there's all sorts of great stuff.
And a lot of the breweries could probably recommend someone that they know that's already doing some sort of everyone moved from blogs to, we're dating ourselves here and I'm dating myself, but they moved from blogs to like an Instagram post and,
the incredibly valuable Instagram post.
I still, again, I'm a dinosaur. I like seeing someone put some thought into writing a long form, like Jordan's is too long. It's like 1 million words of blog post, but to put some thought into the thing behind, it's not just for likes. It's for, you want to give people some news. But we've moved away from that. But a lot of what I'm saying is a lot of breweries probably know someone that could help with that.
Well, actually, that's how we got Mel for Ottawa. Josh McJanet, I think.
Yeah, from Dominion.
Yeah, he
was he was just on the podcast.
Yep.
Josh is now a member of the OCB, and Dominion's doing some amazing things. Big friends of Great Lakes, and we're friends of theirs, of course. Josh is running for a board seat for the OCB. That's inside baseball. But love Josh. And
how does that work? Does he put up posters that just say "sex"? Now that I have your attention.
No,
Josh.
He's a little bit more involved than that. He's got a good political background, so he's going to be very good moving forward with the OCB. So the Canadian Beer News site shut down. I've talked about it. I don't know how many times I've mentioned this on. I think it's been like every episode, because Greg and I go back even longer than you and I go back. But so he shut it down. He told me he was selling it, or he told me he was getting out of the game. And you and I had talked and said someone's got to take up the mantle. You saw a need to fill the void, and that it caused Canadian Beer News going away.
Yeah. So
you created News and Notes. So how's it been? And has the traffic been good? Like, are you going to expand on it? Because we need someone to talk about what's going on in this industry.
Well, it's part of a larger plan, if I'm completely honest.
Well, tell us about it.
Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, because we went down to 2 issues a year for the growler, the issue becomes very simply like, that does not make a magazine survive. You can't do that way. We're if you wanted to do an annual where you just had a map to all the breweries in the province and you did little profiles on all of them, that'd be great. You could do that. It would be saleable. You might even top the Canadian bestseller list, because you only need to sell 5,000 copies to do that. I mean,
that's a dig at
Wabgisha. Take that, Margaret Atwood.
Wabgisha Rice is my favorite Canadian author right now. Anyway,
but you're looking at it that way, and you're thinking to yourself, well, how do I make this magazine survive? Because it is the last man standing.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is, we need something to give us momentum. Like, if we can get online content, I mean, the internet exists now. That would be great if we could factor that into the fucking plan. I mean, I'm not allowed to. Am I allowed to swear?
You can swear on this podcast. 100% you can.
It would be really, really useful if we had people looking at the website every couple of weeks, and we could maybe convince them that spending $3 an issue on the growler was worthwhile. Like, it's sitting in the tap room. I'm sure you don't move all of them, but you probably move most of them.
Oh, yes, we do. We move them. Yes, we do.
Good. So
and
you're the ones.
And the ones that we don't, we give away to our best customers. So it's really great to see people coming in and they're like, what's this? And we're like, you don't have to buy it right now, but you can grab it and sit at the bar and read it while you're having a beer. No problem.
But it's such an interesting problem, because like the value of the thing compared to the effort that goes into it, like
it's
invaluable.
Yeah.
Like it's a map to all the breweries in the province. Put it in your car.
For listeners that don't know, the Growler magazine, it comes out biannually.
Yeah.
It's available at a lot of breweries across Canada BC and Ontario.
Yeah.
But they're two different volumes. In BC, is it done quarterly or is it done?
I believe they're still quarterly. That's
Okay.
Joe Wiebe who's in charge of that.
That's right. In Ontario, Jordan, as the editor, it comes out biannually. It's $3 a copy at the breweries. And if you're a brewery that buys some advertising, you get a little bit more issues. Maybe I'll put that kindly. Yeah. And it's a great resource for keeping track of where to go, where you've been, and all that stuff. So, what's the URL?
Oh, it's the Growler on.ca or something like that.
Okay, Growler Ontario. Just Google.
I'm sure it'll be in the description for the episode.
So we're gonna go into George Brown now.
Can I hit one more thing with the news and notes?
Yeah, of course you can.
The important thing about the news and notes is that there needs to be some kind of record for this stuff. Mm-hmm. Like Google is becoming less functional. What they refer to it as online is the enshittification of the internet. Things are getting worse and worse because of AI. So the idea that you have information linked to in one place, I mean, as a historian, as an archivist, as somebody who's thought about this a lot, is you need that to be in one place. And maybe it doesn't exist forever, but
I'm going to cut you off. So that's a good, what you just said is you're doing this not only just to share the news, but you're doing it to document the news.
Correct.
So what are you doing once you release this to the world? Are you saving
well, I've got it all saved as an archive.
Okay.
But I mean,
so what are you going to do with that one day?
Oh, God knows. I'm not even doing it for me. But I imagine 50 years from now, there's some guy who has the same problem that I have with Canadian Breweries Limited.
Yeah.
And it's just like, hey, at least you'll have context for what the things looked like. Like, I can't tell you what beers tasted like in the 1940s.
I keep my blog open.
Yeah.
Just so people can go back and do a search and see what we were talking about 2007 to 2012. And my traffic is still quite high.
Yeah.
Which it doesn't exist. There's no updates or whatever, but I applaud that. I think that's great for the industry. We're trying to tell breweries you should be, it takes a lot of work, but you should be archiving your history yourselves so that one day you can just hand over a box to the Archives Ontario and they build this all out so that researchers like you can go in and go, I'm going to write about the beer industry from, during COVID years. Well, we have to have some records that are publicly accessible. So,
well, and the other thing is in addition to the news portion of it, I now have an events calendar so people can go and see what festivals are coming up. Mm-hmm. That's really good. I mean, just for saleable beer, Yeah. Because you need to get the thing in people's hands in order for it to work. But in addition to that, there's a bit at the bottom where I recommend 6 beers that came in this week. And that's just fun to write because it's mostly an excuse for jokes.
And we sponsor that, and we've got one listener. But we sponsor that. We don't expect that. We sponsor because we want this news to be out there.
Yeah,
we want Great Lakes wants people to be talking about beer. It doesn't matter if it's us or someone else. We just want people talking about beer. So we're moving on to George Brown. I taught at George Brown for 4 years.
Yes,
beer education course, continuing education, beer education 101. I was starting to grow the family. I was working full time with Great Lakes, and I needed to get out. And I said, who do you want to come in to replace you? And I said, there's one person. I'm going to give you one name. He's going to do it. I'll make the introductions. And you've been there since. So that was what year?
That was 2017.
2017.
Probably, May 1st.
And you took whatever I inherited from Ron Keefe, who inherited from Stephen Beaumont, who I don't know if Roger Mateg was there at one point, but
no.
You have created something wholly unique in this province at George Brown. So tell us about what you do at George Brown.
Well, I mean, I started with your course, And it was a really interesting situation. Jesse Valens had taken over for a semester.
Mm-hmm, that's right. Yeah, he was a fill-in. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's using...
Jesse, if you're listening, you're a fill-in.
That's right. You were replaced. No, Jesse, like he just got 97 on Canada's 100 Best Restaurants.
Yeah, the guy's insane.
He's terrific.
He's the food. Yeah,
just an absolute
Jesse Valens. If you don't know, he's the executive chef at Barbarian Steakhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Was a co-founder.
Yeah.
Of Merit. Was it co-founder or just the?
Well, I believe he was in charge of the kitchen from the get-go, and he still is.
Yeah. Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Okay. Amazing person too. Knows the shit out of beer.
Yeah, and like, I don't know if you've ever tried that house-made salami they've got.
Yes, I have. When he was at, what was the other place he owned?
Maple Leaf Tavern.
No, before that, the Saint.
Yeah.
We did a brewery tour a pub crawl back then, and he brought us in, and that mustard that he had too. Oh,
I traded him.
The guy's amazing.
Traded him a couple cans of American IPA for some of that.
Oh yeah.
If you've never had that on a breakfast sandwich, oh my God.
Okay, so George Brown.
So I had a week to get used to the idea of teaching. They gave me the list of beers that were available for the course. I basically immediately started rebranding all of the stuff that goes on in there.
Yeah.
And I think because you worked for Labatt for so long, you had a lot of macro beers in 1 week of the course.
We did first week. The first week was something like lagers, something like that. And we were trying the difference between the big lagers to say, this is kind of what beer has always been sold as. Week 2, we moved into. So I wanted everyone to try like a Keith's. And they're like, why isn't this in the IPA week? And we're like, because you'll see soon enough. But yeah, so continue. Yeah. So whoever wrote the curriculum before I took over, it was fluid.
Yeah.
And so there was weeks where I know you've shared on social that you couldn't get a certain beer, but it was like that even back then where you're like, okay, we want the smoked beer, the roast beer from, and you couldn't buy it in Ontario. So we'd have to be like, okay, what are we going to substitute this with? And anyway.
Well, so you end up in a situation where it's just like, okay, I've got 4 macro lagers. What am I going to do with this stuff? Mm-hmm. And basically I came up with an exercise where they have to taste all 4 of them side by side and tell me how they're different from each other. And it's like throwing people into the deep end. If you ever judge a competition and you get the lager category and you're not used to it, it's like you're splitting hairs. It's really...
Especially if you pour them in like a 5-ounce glass too. You lose the carbonation. Yeah. One of the things I did with that course is it took Bud Light, and it wasn't, I don't think it was on the curriculum, but I did a Bud Light and I did a Guinness.
Yep.
Poured them into the same, or 2 different glasses, but I did it in a way that you have to drink them side by each.
Yep.
That's my French coming out. And they would try the Bud Light, and then they go right to the Guinness, and like the Guinness is so much smoother. But everyone was always, because back when I was doing it, they were very new to beer. Uh-huh. So I don't know if you still have that at this course or in this juncture, but then it was a lot of brand new people to beer, and they would try the Guinness and go, well, it actually does have some flavor versus the Bud Light. It's just cold. And there was a lot of people that went through that course that ended up going on to own a brewery, the Exchange Brewery, Sextant Brewery.
Right. They existed for a while.
Catapult Brewery.
They existed for a while.
Yeah. No, he's still around.
Oh, that's right.
But there was a lot of people that went through that course. But so again, you haven't answered the question, man. I got to hold your feet to the fire. What are you doing at this, at George Brown?
Well, at this point we get a 3 beer certificate, 3 course certificate. The first one is beer styles. It's like 6 weeks. I want to say at this point, it's probably the best value going anywhere. Like, if you were to buy all the beers that you taste in the course, it would cost about $100 more than the course. Yeah. So we've got it broken down into weeks based on history and culture. So instead of doing it lagers and ales, which I think is kind of an artificial distinction anyway.
Yeah.
I think it's just all metabolic rate for the yeast. We've got Germany, England, Belgium, North America.
Do you still use the Michael Jackson videos?
Periodically, yeah. Just because it's fun to introduce people to a weird Yorkshireman.
Yeah.
periodically I blame stuff on them. Like I think the Belgian styles are so, like especially the Trappist stuff, it makes no sense. And I think he just shoehorned a lot of that together.
Oh, he was the one doing it.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, he did a lot of really good work.
So people can go to George Brown, learn more about the program.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me talk about the other two courses just because they're more interesting.
Well, you do that.
Beer 2 is grain to glass. And when I was at Niagara College, one of the things that always bothered me was the fact that like they didn't really synergize the courses that were being on offer. So at one point you have an ingredient course, and at one point you've got a brewing course, and at one point you've got a sensory course. So for the Beer 2 class at George Brown, I'm doing something that I don't think anybody else is doing in North America, where I'm showing you the ingredient, the process that makes it into wort, a beer that uses that ingredient, and then, you know, you get to taste all of those things side by side. So if you have Mill Street Organic, for example, which is a great choice for me because it's always available. You have Wireman Organic Pilsner Malt, which they get to taste. You've got wort made from Wireman Organic Pilsner Malt, which they get to taste.
Okay.
And then you get to see the finished beer, which I think like with the raw Waka hops or whatever it is, you know, it's like 10 IBU or something. But you get to see the process. And I do that for Pilsner Malt, Vienna Malt, Munich Malt, Crystal, roasted barley.
Okay.
So like you do that for malt, hops, yeast. You get to talk about a little bit. I mean, I've got Cali in there. I've got WLP 351.
He's turning nerd right there, listeners.
3470. ISAR if you're all escarpmenty. And then Orval because you need Brett.
Yeah.
But I mean, you get to see all these things. And then we go to Toronto Brewing the third week and we design and brew a beer. And then we talk about packaging. We go to Great Lakes Brew Pub in order to show them what like a decent keg fridge looks like without any infected lines.
Yep.
Because Great Lakes Brew Pub is just pristine. It's wonderful. And everybody's so nice about it all the time. Jason especially.
Very good.
Yeah. And, Tracy, she's great. Yeah. And then week 5, we do the Siebel Intermediate Off Flavor course, which they don't even really do in Cicerone or Prud'homme. And week 6, they get to taste the beer that they made, and then they have to analyze it and completely break it down into nothing, which is just hilarious to watch if you're me. It's like, here's the thing you really like. Please tell me what's wrong with it. So we had that course. That's like, an incredible amount of information for about $250.
Yeah. I think George Brown's always been a great value. So,
and the third one,
you got 2 seconds to tell us about the third one.
Beer and food pairing, chef making food a la minute. Try and figure out how the thing works. It's cheaper than going to the movies 6 weeks.
And what do we say? Cut, contrast, complement. And do you have the fourth? Marriage.
Well, probably marriage.
Yeah, I use marriage. Yeah.
You fancy pants.
Yes. So we're going to go to an ad. This has been a very in-depth, very long discussion, but I didn't expect anything less with Jordan St. John in the hot seat. We're going to have an ad. We're going to come back. Jordan, you stick around for rapid fire questions and then hear me go through the industry news. You want to stick around?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Hang tight. We're going to have another sip. You're going to hear an ad. We'll come back with rapid fire questions with Jordan St. John.
There appears to be only one line on this sheet. $50 for a case of Great Lakes Premium Lager. That's it? That's the ad? Okay. Cases of Great Lakes Premium Lager are only $50 every day of the year.
Yes, indeed. Great Lakes Premium Lager. My beer of summer is only $50 a case every day. That is Peter Bullett's line. Every day.
$50 a case. That's a bargain, Troy.
That is, that's what we've been doing for years.
How do you even do that?
I don't know, to be honest.
Is Peter in the back of the brewery shoveling the grain himself?
We were just able to do it, and so let's do it. Why not? So every day. Rapid fire questions. We're back with Jordan St. John. What beer have you been enjoying recently?
Old Dusseldorf alt beer from Great Lakes Brewing.
Oh, that's very kind of you, but another brewery.
Oh, from another brewery? Gosh. I'm not really sure. I spend a lot of time drinking craft beer in Ontario. I go to Godspeed a lot for Czech
Godspeed,
Sundays.
yes, you do. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. It's great.
they're doing amazing things, and
I would go with the Sklepnik probably.
And Bim was just back in town for the Quebec thing that he did, and he's back in Japan doing like seven collabs. Okay, this is rapid fire. Give a plug to an Ontario brewery other than Godspeed now, because he just named them doing some pretty cool things.
Well, I'd have to say that the second Wedge Brewing Company from Uxbridge is coming up.
Why is that? Because you probably did a beer with them.
Well, I did a beer with them. Yeah, it's called Životny. It's a Czech-style lager. It was mostly inspired by Godspeed.
How many collab beers have you done over the years?
I'm now at 24. I'm at a full 2 for...
That's it?
Yeah, of collab beers.
Yeah?
Well, I keep talking to Lackey about doing another version of Lazarus, but
I thought you had way more under your belt than that.
Well, when you consider the fact that most people have none.
Yeah.
I'm bringing the average up.
Okay. I think I know what you're going to say to this one, but name a couple of your favorite bars.
I really like the Rebel House. I don't get there as often as I'd like to, but it's got a lovely little front bar. And I like the 1990s blonde wood thing like that.
The meatloaf is solid there too.
Yeah, plus Karen's a very good chef generally.
Okay, that's it? That's your, yeah?
Well,
name a couple.
A couple of bars. The Queen and Beaver. Periodically I'll stop in the Queen and Beaver. They have the best plowman's lunch in the city.
Okay.
Also, they usually got Durham ESB on tap, which is a very good choice.
Yeah.
And the Only Cafe.
There you go.
Yeah.
For Fabian Skidmore. I was waiting for that.
Well, for Alice. Alice is doing a good job too.
Yeah, and she wouldn't come on. She's not going to come on this podcast. She's too shy. So maybe we can convince her to come on.
She's a pretty good talker. I tell you, I saw her hold forth on the patio the other day for about an hour and a half.
Alice, I know you're listening, so we're going to get you on the show. Should Toronto or Ontario or both have a beer museum?
Theoretically, but where would you put it?
St. Lawrence Market.
An interesting idea, except for the fact that they need the market gallery for other stuff. I mean, the problem that you have is that Larry Shirk's collection has been deeded to Niagara College, and as far as I can tell, they have never gone through it. Mm-hmm. So, the amount of archival work that would need to happen, probably by...
Sean Smith from Ontario Archives.
Sean Smith would be a great choice, but there's also Wayne. Wayne would be good. But you need a dedicated place for it. And I don't think anybody has the budget for that. But if we could get somebody, some rich benefactor to dedicate a lot of money to this once they pass away.
Did you ever go to the Toronto Museum or the Toronto Showcase out in Brewing Museum?
Yes, I did.
Wayne Reeves. Yeah. Did you ever go to the Waterloo one?
I didn't get to the Waterloo one.
It was fantastic. And we just need something like that. Even if the ROM did a little tiny section of what's going on.
Well, you know what I wanted to see from that up close, but I never got the chance to? There is actually sheet music from the Reinhardt Brewery.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, there was a song for the brewery that I think it's in Malcolm's collection.
Calgary Brewing Company, back in the day, they had their own songbook, and I have a copy of that. I found it from the 1928 or something like that, and it's all Christmas songs, but it's all about the brewery too, so it's pretty cool. eBay.
Well, there's a podcast episode. Yeah. We get a band in here,
sing the songs. Name a person in the industry that either has inspired you or continues to inspire you.
Michael Hancock, man, he just keeps going. I think he's more machine now than man.
Okay, good one. And the last question on rapid fire today, Jordan, best hangover cure.
Teetotaling and prayer.
Teetotaling and prayer. All right. We could go on for hours and hours, Jordan. You and I will have you back on the show, and we'll pick a certain topic that we just really drive into. But thanks so much for coming here, talking about the growler, George Brown, the industry, your new love affair with the OCB, and everything in between, your books, podcasts, and actually, I do this every time. What's next for Jordan St. John? What are you going to get into? I'm thanking you and trying to kick you out, but what is next?
Well, I got to go judge the Mondial de la Bière 30th anniversary in Montreal next weekend. That's the Greg Noonan Cup.
That's right. And Dosievos, Old Dusseldorf's going to be in that category.
Well, I'll try not to take any notice of that. I'm not sure what categories I'm judging. But after that, I have to go to Chicago for a week to train at Siebel.
Okay.
For the WSET program for Ontario. So that should be interesting. I've talked to some of the Twitter luminaries down there. Jenny Fafland. And
you should try to get together with Josh Knoll.
Josh Knoll, yeah.
author as well.
We could complain bitterly about Goose Island.
There you go. Well, thanks again, Jordan, for coming down all the way from Midtown to Etobicoke, to glorious Etobicoke. We're going to finish up this podcast, go back to the brewery, have a beer, and have a great long weekend, even though this episode is coming out next Tuesday. Have a great long weekend. Thanks for coming.
I'm probably going to lie down for a while. It's going to be great.
All right. Cheers. Cole's Notes. It's time to hear from our man in the lab, Cole Raiskums, in another edition of his Cole's Notes. Cole will be discussing or talking about pectins and how they affect our beer. And be prepared, he's going to use a lot of big words that I can't even pronounce. Take it away, Cole.
Thanks, Troy. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another Cole's Notes segment. Today, we're going to be learning about pectins and how they affect our beer. Pectins are a complex chain of sugar molecules called heteropolysaccharides that are found in the cell wall of many plants, with a higher content in citrus and stone fruits. Generally, this isn't really something that brewers have to worry about. But when we add fruit to our beers, like our Big Party Day beer, it can cause some unexpected results. When added to beer, fruits with high pectin contents create murky haziness called pectin haze, which looks very similar to unfiltered apple cider. When combined with alcohol and proteins normally found in beer, it can lead to filtration issues and lots of sediment forming in the cans or bottles. This is because pectin forms a gel when combined with these ingredients. While it doesn't actively affect the flavor of the beer, it can be very visually unappealing. So, in order to deal with pectin, breweries use pectinase, a specialized enzyme that breaks down the pectin heteropolysaccharide complexes into smaller pieces. Once the pectins are broken down, they no longer stay suspended in solution and settle to the bottom of the tank with yeast, hops, and proteins. So the next time you pour a tasty glass of fruit beer this summer, don't forget to thank your friendly neighborhood enzyme pectinase. Who knew science could taste so good?
I didn't, but now I do. Thanks, Cole.
Thanks, Troy. Cheers.
Cheers.
2024 marks the 30th anniversary of the Etobicoke Sports Hall of Fame. Founded in 1994, the Hall continues to thrive and honor for all time those individuals and organizations who achieve the highest standard of distinction in sport, inspiring and supporting the pursuit of excellence by student and Special Olympics athletes within our community. President and chair of the board, Joanne Noble, is always awe-inspired by how the Etobicoke community continues to produce amazing people through sport. From the beginning, after the great Johnny Bauer was the first to be inducted into the Hall, there are now 176 honored members 30 years later. And just as important, the Hall has provided over $150,000 in scholarships for Humber College and Etobicoke High School student athletes and Etobicoke Special Olympics athletes.
Around the industry.
Around the industry. So I mentioned the Ontario Craft Brewers Conference on the show 2 weeks ago. They have announced the keynote speakers, the Ontario Craft Brewers Conference and Suppliers Marketplace, to be exact. The two keynote speakers are Ted Nolan and Ben Edmunds. So Ted Nolan is a former NHL and Olympic hockey coach. He's going to come and talk about preserving through adversity, leadership, managerial styles, and how to build teams for success. And Ben Edmunds, a name you might not know because he's based out of Portland, Oregon. He is the original brewmaster from Breakside Brewing Company. They have grown their business into 6 establishments across Oregon. This guy continues to win awards left, right, and center, and he's going to come in and talk about quality control. It's going to be a packed conference. It's taking place November 6th to 7th. Registration just opened, so you can head over to OntarioCraftBrewers.com and grab some tickets for your brewery. Non-members and non-beer people, if you just want to go and attend the conference, you can do that as well.
Hey, wasn't he in charge of the Latvian team?
He was in charge. Ted Nolan, that's right. Yeah, he was an Olympic coach with the Latvian team at one point. Yes.
I hear they beat the Czechs.
I think they beat some team like that. Yeah.
Wow.
Some country. Over to BC, and I had to point this out because Steel and Oak, a brewery out in BC, they just ran a big promotion tattoo. If you get a tattoo of their logo, you could have beer for a year. They did that. They got a ton of press, and then the BC government, in charge of the liquor board, they said, "Hey, no, you can't do that." So they had to do a mea culpa. They shut it down. Well, I'm here to tell you that Great Lakes supporters, we have people out there with a Gordy Levesque, who's on the Canuck Pale Ale can, Roland Baggetts, who's on both Lake Effect and Sunnyside cans, Karma Citra. We have a couple people with Octopus Wants to Fight tattoos. You know, the most dedicated people don't need free beer for a year, but we ended up giving them free beer for a year. So we have a bunch of people out in the province of Ontario that are sporting Great Lakes tattoos, which is so awesome. In bad news in the industry, Brew Culture has announced that they're going to be closing. Brew Culture is a group that represents brands like Yakima Chief Hops, Roy Farms, Mutin's Malt, White Labs. I butchered the Mutin's, but that's me. I'm from Brecken. White Labs Fermentation and Yeast. So it's a big blow to the small craft breweries in this province that will not have Brew Culture to call on at this time.
That's right, Troy. It's a little bit difficult to be all things to everybody. And sometimes, I think, one of the problems I might have encountered is that BSG did a really good job just with malt, and maybe Hops Connect did a really good job just with hops, but Brew Culture is trying to do everything.
Yeah, and a lot of breweries can just buy from YCH directly and stuff, and now they opened the new distribution center in Montreal, and they sank a lot of money into that. So it's very sad because Dan's been involved in the brewing industry for a long time, so we wish them the best. Over to good news, Blog TO reported that a new brewery is opening in Toronto soon, Bickford Brewery. I'm not sure their slogan yet, but that's just from one brewery to another, you know, craft beer brewed something and then you put it
hand brewed mouth drank.
Yeah. Okay. So they're opening later this year over on Harvard Street. So that's some good news in beer because, we've all been hearing about the closures. And last but not least, over at Great Lakes, we have a number of positions open and job postings. If you go over to greatlakesbeer.com/careers, you'll find licensee sales manager. We're looking for someone to come in, take over our bar and restaurant sales management, or the management of the bar and restaurant sales team. We have a territory retail account manager for GTA West, and we have a number of positions open up at the Brew Pub in downtown Toronto. Today's episode was fueled by cans of the crushable Great Lakes Lager, which you can find all over Ontario at the beer store, LCBO, select grocery stores, and online at greatlakesbeershop.ca. Jordan enjoyed the Dos Llevos Limon, the lime version of our Mexican lager. You can visit the brewery at 30 Queen Elizabeth Boulevard in Etobicoke or grab some delicious eats and fresh pours at our brew pub at 11 Lower Jarvis. If you have any content you'd love to hear us discuss on the show or just want to tell us what you're drinking, drop us a line at podcast@greatlakesbeer.com. Until next time, please remember to keep tipping your glass of fresh GLB in the right direction. Supporting local never tasted so good. That was an extra long so.
To learn more about what's happening at Great Lakes Brewery, visit greatlakesbeer.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter or follow Great Lakes Beer on your favorite social media platforms.